That night, as I scrolled through social media trying to distract myself from the loneliness of my 60th birthday, I saw my daughter tagged in photos at an elegant restaurant, raising a glass in celebration with my ex-husband and the woman he left me for. Just hours earlier, she had called to say she couldn't make it due to an emergency at work. Yet there she was, calling his new wife Mom, while I sat alone with a store-bought cupcake and an unlit candle. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we've sacrificed everything to protect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I remember exactly how it felt that evening 5 years ago. The day had begun with such simple hopes. I'd woken early, feeling that quiet anticipation that birthdays bring even as we age. 60 felt significant, a milestone worth marking, even if modestly. I'd spent the morning in my small kitchen preparing a celebration dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a few of our family favorites. I made Eliza's favorite lemon cake from scratch, the same recipe I'd used for her birthdays throughout childhood. The familiar motions of measuring flour, creaming butter and sugar, and grating lemon zest brought back memories of her childhood, of birthday parties with handmade decorations because we couldn't afford store-bought ones, of her gap-toothed smile as she blew out candles year after year. The table was set for 3, me, my daughter, and her husband Marcus. I'd used my good china, the set my mother had passed down to me, reserved for special occasions. A small bouquet of fresh daisies and lavender from my garden served as a centerpiece. The reservation at Bellini's, my favorite Italian restaurant, was for 7 p.m., a treat I rarely indulged in on my teacher's pension. Throughout the day, I received the usual birthday messages, from former colleagues at the high school where I'd taught English for 30 years, from neighbors, from the few, friends who remembered, but nothing from Eliza yet, which wasn't unusual. My daughter had always been the type to call rather than text, especially for important occasions. At 5:30, my phone finally rang. Eliza's name flashed across the screen, and I answered with a smile, expecting final details about our evening plans. Perhaps they were running a few minutes late. I'd already decided that wouldn't matter. "Mom," she said, her voice tense. "I'm so sorry, but there's an emergency presentation due tomorrow morning, and my boss just dropped it on me. I have to pull an all-nighter at the office." My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady, as I'd learned to do through decades of motherhood. Disappointment was part of life. I'd taught Eliza that lesson many times. "Oh, sweetheart, that's terrible timing. What about Marcus? Could he still come over? You shouldn't have to work alone on your birthday." There was a pause, almost imperceptible, before she answered. "He's swamped too, helping me gather data for the presentation. We're both really disappointed." Her voice softened with what I thought was genuine regret. "We'll make it up to you this weekend, I promise. A belated celebration. Somewhere even nicer than Bellini's." I assured her it was fine, that work had to come first, that there would be other birthdays. We hung up with I love yous exchanged, though hers seemed hurried. After the call, I moved through the house like a ghost, blowing out the candles. I'd arranged on side tables, wrapping the untouched cake in foil, and calling Bellini's to cancel the reservation I'd made weeks ago. The house felt particularly quiet that evening. At 65 now, 5 years after that fateful birthday, I've grown accustomed to solitude. But back then, the silence was still new, still painful. My husband Richard had left a decade prior, trading in our 25-year marriage for a romance with Vanessa, the young art teacher who'd joined his department at Westlake High School. I remember the day he told me he was leaving. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just a quiet declaration over Sunday morning coffee that he'd found someone who makes me feel alive again. Eliza had been in her final year of college then. When she came home for Christmas break and found her father gone, she'd broken down, demanding to know why he would destroy our family. For years after that, she'd claimed to hate him, to despise Vanessa. "I'll never forgive him for what he did to you, Mom," she'd promised, holding my hand as I signed the divorce papers. "We don't need him. We have each other." That night of my 60th birthday, I poured myself a glass of the Merlot I'd bought for our celebration and settled onto the couch, opening my laptop. Perhaps some mindless scrolling would distract me from the hollow feeling in my chest. I hadn't. Even changed out of the navy blue dress I'd put on for dinner, the one Eliza had given me last Christmas, saying it brought out the blue in my eyes. That's when I saw it, a post from James Peterson, Richard's colleague and old family friend. Time-stamped just 30 minutes earlier. I hadn't unfriended these connections from my past. Perhaps I should have. The photo showed an elegant private dining room at Montclair, the most expensive restaurant in our city. A place Richard had always claimed was pretentious when I'd hinted at going there for anniversaries. Richard and Vanessa sat at the head of the table, all smiles and champagne. And there, sitting right beside them, were Eliza and Marcus, raising their glasses in a toast. The caption read, "Wonderful celebration for Vanessa's 45th, family united." In love. My fingers trembled as I zoomed in on the image. There was a cake, much more elaborate than the simple one I'd baked, with delicate sugar flowers that must have cost a fortune. There were gifts wrapped in shimmering paper piled high, beside Vanessa. And there was my daughter, leaning over to hug the woman, her lips forming words I could make out even without sound. "Happy birthday, Mom." The wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. I barely noticed the red liquid, seeping into the cream-colored rug, a rug I'd saved for months to buy when we'd finally paid off Eliza's college loans. All I could see was that image, burning into my mind as more photos appeared in the comments. Eliza helping Vanessa open a gift, a delicate gold bracelet that glinted in the restaurant's soft lighting. Marcus with his arm around Richard, laughing at some shared joke. A group photo with Richard's parents, the same in-laws who had stopped calling me after the divorce, despite 25 years of holiday dinners and family gatherings. The emergency presentation was a lie. The work crisis was fabricated. My daughter had chosen to celebrate Vanessa's birthday instead of mine, on the same day, and she was calling this woman Mom. I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my own abandoned celebration, scrolling through more photos as they appeared. Each one was another twist of the knife. The deception would have been painful enough, but seeing the joy on my daughter's face as she embraced the woman who had replaced me, it was as if the past 20 years of sacrifice had meant nothing. 20 years of parent-teacher conferences attended alone, of working summers to afford Eliza's dance lessons and soccer camps, of staying up late to help with science projects and college applications, of being both mother and father while Richard built his new life with his younger wife. That night, as I cleaned up the broken glass and wine stain, I made a decision that would change everything. The woman who had raised Eliza alone after Richard left, who had worked 2 jobs to put her through college, who had been both mother and father, that woman deserved better. And it was finally time I recognized it too. I wasn't always alone. There was a time when the house echoed with laughter, when weekends meant pancake breakfasts and impromptu dance parties in the living room. Richard and I had met during our senior year of college, both of us English majors with dreams of inspiring young minds. We married the summer after graduation, naive and hopeful, certain that our shared passion for literature and teaching would sustain us through whatever challenges life might bring. For many years, it did. We began our careers at neighboring schools, spent evenings grading papers side by side at the kitchen table, and saved every extra penny toward buying our modest 3-bedroom home on Maple Street. When Eliza was born 5 years into our marriage, Richard cried as he held her, promising her the world in whispered vows while I watched, exhausted but blissfully happy. Those early years of parenthood blur together in my memory, a kaleidoscope. Of first steps, first words, first days of school. Richard was a devoted father then, the kind who coached soccer teams and built elaborate science fair projects. He read to Eliza every night, different voices for each character, until she was old enough to prefer reading on her own. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, secure in our little world of three. The change came so gradually that I barely noticed it happening. Perhaps it began when Richard was promoted to department head at Westlake High, bringing new responsibilities and longer hours. Or maybe it was when Eliza entered her teenage years, when her need for us shifted, leaving a subtle emptiness between Richard and me. By the time she left for college, Richard and I had become experts at navigating around each other in a house that suddenly felt too large. When he first mentioned Vanessa Taylor, I thought nothing of it. Just a new art teacher, young and enthusiastic, bringing fresh energy to the school. Richard spoke of her innovative teaching methods, how she'd organized a student mural project that transformed the school's drab hallways. I even met her at the faculty Christmas party, a slender woman with copper hair and an easy laugh, who complimented my cranberry dress and asked thoughtful questions about my AP literature curriculum. "You've made quite an impression on Richard," she'd said, her smile warm. "He talks about your teaching methods all the time." I'd been flattered, pleased that after 20 years of marriage, my husband still spoke highly of me to his colleagues. How utterly, foolishly blind I was. The truth emerged on an ordinary Sunday. I'd made Richard's favorite breakfast, Belgian, waffles with fresh berries, hoping to discuss summer vacation plans. He waited until I'd poured the coffee, until we were both seated at the kitchen table we'd bought when we first moved in. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice steady but his fingers restless against the table's worn surface. "I've fallen in love with someone else." I remember staring at him, waiting for more words, some explanation that would make sense of this sudden declaration. When none came, I asked, "Who?" "Vanessa Taylor." His gaze dropped to his coffee cup. "It wasn't planned, Margaret. It just happened." Margaret. He'd called me Margaret, not Maggie, as he had for over 2 decades. That small detail somehow cut, deeper than his confession. "Are you having an affair?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Calm, measured, as if inquiring about the weather forecast. "Yes," he admitted. "For 6 months now. I've tried to end it, to recommit to us, but I can't. She makes me feel alive again." 6 months, half a year of lies, of late nights working on curriculum, of weekend workshops that never existed, of me trusting and unquestioning, keeping his dinner warm and asking about his day. "Do you want a divorce?" I asked, still in that strange, detached voice. He nodded, relief visibly washing over him at my practical question, my lack of hysteria. "I think it would be best. For everyone." "Does Eliza know?" "No, I wanted to tell you first." That, at least, was something. A small mercy. When Eliza came home from college the following weekend, we sat her down together. Richard explained that we had grown apart, that sometimes love changes. He never mentioned Vanessa. That cowardice was the first crack in Eliza's image of her father. The second came 3 months later, when Richard moved into Vanessa's downtown apartment. Eliza connected the dots quickly, her face flushing with anger as she confronted him over the phone. I could hear her voice from across the living room. "You left Mom for one of your teachers? Are you having some kind of midlife crisis?" Richard's response must have been inadequate because Eliza hung up on him, then threw herself into my arms, sobbing with a fury I hadn't seen since she was a little girl denied a coveted toy. "I'll never forgive him," she vowed, her face pressed against my shoulder. "And I'll never speak to that woman. Ever." For 2 years, she kept that promise. She came home on breaks and holidays, but refused to visit Richard's new home. She returned his Christmas and birthday gifts unopened. When she graduated college with honors in business administration, She asked that he not attend the ceremony. "It's your day," I told her over coffee the morning before graduation. "He's still your father. He should be there." "It would make me uncomfortable," she insisted. "Besides, you're the one who made this possible, Mom. You're the one who deserves to sit in that audience and hear my name called." So I sat alone, clutching an extra program for Richard, watching as our daughter crossed the stage in her cap and gown. Later, I sent him photos and the program, unwilling to punish him despite everything. He replied with a brief text. "Thank you, Margaret. She looks beautiful, like you." The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Richard didn't contest my claim to the house, though its value had appreciated considerably since our purchase. He agreed to split his pension and retirement accounts fairly. His lawyer seemed almost apologetic, pushing papers across the conference table with downcast eyes. "Is she pregnant?" I asked Richard as we walked to the parking lot after signing the final documents. The question had been gnawing at me for months, a possible explanation for his urgency. "What?" "No." He looked genuinely startled. "Why would you ask that?" "I'm trying to understand why, after 25 years, you couldn't wait until Eliza graduated." "Why the rush?" He didn't answer immediately, his keys jangling in his hand as he searched for words. Finally, he sighed. "I'm 48, Margaret. I realized I might have another 30 years ahead of me. I didn't want to spend them wondering what could have been. Another 30 years. The phrase echoed in my head as I drove home alone. Another 30 years he didn't want to spend with me. I threw myself into work after that, taking on additional AP classes and summer school sessions. The extra income helped cover the bills that had previously been split between two salaries. And the constant activity kept me from dwelling on the emptiness of the house. Weekends were the hardest. Those long stretches of hours that highlighted how thoroughly my life had contracted. Eliza called regularly during this period, checking in with a devotion that touched me deeply. She'd secured a position at a marketing firm in the city, a 90-minute drive away, close enough to visit but far enough to build her own life. When she brought Marcus home to meet me the following Christmas, I was struck by how much he resembled a younger Richard. The same thoughtful eyes, the same habit of rubbing his chin when considering a question. "He teaches high school history," Eliza told me proudly, her arm linked through his. "Just like Dad used to." It was the first time she'd mentioned Richard without bitterness, a small but significant shift. I should have recognized it as the first sign of thawing, but I was too relieved by her happiness to look deeper. The wedding came 2 years later, a spring ceremony in the botanical gardens where Richard and I had once taken Eliza for weekend picnics. By then, the initial shock of our divorce had faded, replaced by a dull acceptance. When Eliza asked if I would mind if her father attended, I assured her that I wanted her day to be perfect, complete with both parents present. "Will she be there?" Eliza asked, not needing to specify who she was. "I assume so," I replied carefully. "She's part of your father's life now." Eliza nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'll seat them far from you. You won't have to interact." True to her word, during the ceremony, Richard and Vanessa sat on the opposite side of the aisle, 4 rows back. I caught glimpses of them during the reception, Richard looking distinguished with new silver at his temples, Vanessa elegant in jade green, both of them keeping a respectful distance. I appreciated their discretion, the way they allowed me, this day untainted by awkward encounters. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until that 60th birthday, was that somewhere between her engagement and the years that followed, Eliza had not only forgiven Richard, but had welcomed Vanessa into her life completely. The very woman she had once vowed never to speak to had somehow become a second mother to her, while I, who had rebuilt my entire existence around supporting my daughter, was gradually being relegated to the periphery of her life. But on the night of my 60th birthday, as I stared at those photos, this understanding was still taking shape, a painful revelation just beginning to crystallize in my mind. The betrayal I discovered on my 60th birthday wasn't a single moment, but the culmination of 1,000 small deceptions. Looking back now, I can see how the distance between Eliza and me had been growing for years, widening so gradually that I hadn't recognized the chasm until I was staring into its depths. After her wedding, Eliza and Marcus bought a small starter home across town, close enough for Sunday dinners but far enough to establish their independence. I settled into a new routine, teaching during the week, grading papers on Friday nights, and spending Saturdays preparing for Eliza and Marcus's regular Sunday visits. My world had narrowed, but it felt sufficient. I had my students, my garden, my book club, and most importantly, my daughter still close by. The first noticeable shift came when Eliza was promoted to marketing director at her firm. Suddenly, Sunday dinners became more sporadic. "Work is crazy, Mom," she'd explain during our phone calls. "Can we reschedule for next weekend?" I always agreed, understanding the demands of building a career. I'd been young and ambitious once, too. When they did visit, I noticed subtle changes. Eliza began referencing gatherings I hadn't known about: dinner, parties, weekend trips, holiday celebrations where I hadn't been included. Most concerning were the casual mentions of Richard and Vanessa. "Dad and Vanessa just redid their kitchen," she'd say. Or, "We had dinner at this amazing Vietnamese place Vanessa recommended." The first time she mentioned them, I nearly dropped the casserole dish I was carrying to the table. Until then, Eliza had maintained a careful separation between her relationships with me and with her father. She rarely mentioned him in my presence, as if protecting me from the reminder of his existence. "You're seeing your father regularly now?" I asked, striving to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Just occasionally, for holidays mostly." "That's good," I said, meaning it despite the twinge in my chest. "He loves you very much." But it wasn't just holidays, as I would gradually discover. While our Sunday dinners dwindled to once a month, then, once every few months, Eliza was spending more and more time with Richard and Vanessa. I learned this not from my daughter, but from mutual acquaintances who didn't realize the information might pain me. "Saw Eliza and Marcus at Richard's 4th of July barbecue," my colleague Susan mentioned during lunch in the teacher's lounge. "That new deck they built is gorgeous, perfect for entertaining." I nodded and changed the subject, unwilling to admit I hadn't known about the barbecue, much less been invited. Then came Vanessa's gallery opening. An accomplished artist as well as a teacher, she had finally secured a showing at Westbrook Gallery, one of the most prestigious in the city. I learned about this from the local newspaper, which featured a photo of Richard, Vanessa, and several guests at the opening reception. There in the background, partially blurred but unmistakable, were Eliza and Marcus raising champagne glasses in celebration. That evening, I called Eliza, ostensibly to check in, but really to see if she would mention the event. "How was your weekend?" I asked after our usual pleasantries. "Oh, quiet," she replied. "Just caught up on some work and binged that new series I told you about." The lie settled between us, a small stone added to what was becoming a wall. I didn't confront her. I told myself she was protecting my feelings, that she didn't want me to know she was building a relationship with the woman who had replaced me in Richard's life. But the protection felt stifling, condescending, as if I were too fragile to handle the truth of her divided loyalties. By the time my 60th birthday approached, I had begun to sense that Eliza was living two separate lives, one that included me, carefully curated and increasingly limited, and another, fuller life where Richard and Vanessa featured prominently. Still, I clung to the belief that I held a special place in her heart, that the bond between mother and daughter remained sacred despite everything. The day after discovering the birthday celebration photos, I didn't call Eliza. I didn't send an accusatory text or leave a tearful voicemail. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, methodically reviewing the past several years, searching for the moment when my daughter had begun to view me as an obligation rather than a joy. When had our relationship become so imbalanced? When had I become someone to placate rather than someone to cherish? The realization came slowly, painfully. I had let myself become a supporting character in my own life. After Richard left, I had poured everything into being the perfect mother, supportive, available, never demanding, never imposing. I had suppressed my own needs so completely that Eliza had learned to see me not as a full person, but as a role, a function. Mother, caregiver, reliable presence. Meanwhile, Richard and Vanessa, with their newly renovated home and glamorous gallery openings, offered excitement, status, connections. They were living vibrant lives while I had allowed mine to contract around my daughter and my classroom. Of course she was drawn to their world. Who wouldn't be? The phone rang at 10:37 the next morning. Eliza's name flashed on the screen. Mom? Her voice was bright, rehearsed. Sorry I missed you yesterday. The presentation went well, just ran super late. Can we do your birthday dinner this weekend instead? I closed my eyes, picturing her face as she spoke these words, wondering if lying to me had become so easy that she no longer felt even a flicker of guilt. I saw the photos, Eliza. My voice was quiet, but clear. There was a moment of silence, then a small intake of breath. What photos? From Vanessa's birthday celebration. At Montclair, James Peterson posted them. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, defensive edges replacing the false cheer. It wasn't what it looked like, Mom. What did it look like? I asked, genuinely curious about how she would characterize what I had seen. She stammered, then sighed. Look, Vanessa's birthday happened to fall on the same day as yours. Dad made the reservation weeks ago. It would have been rude to decline. And the work emergency? That was real, she insisted. We went to dinner first, then I went to the office. I didn't want to hurt your feelings by telling you about Vanessa's dinner. The explanation was so inadequate, so transparent, that for a moment I couldn't respond. This was my daughter, the same little girl who had once cried when she accidentally broke my favorite mug, so distressed by causing me pain that she'd tried to glue the shattered pieces back together before I noticed. Now she was lying to my face without a tremor in her voice. You called her Mom, I said finally. This time the silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. It's just a word, she said eventually. It doesn't mean anything. Just a word, Mother. The title I had worn with pride for 30 years, through midnight fevers and high school heartbreaks, through college applications and wedding planning. Just a word. I need some time, Eliza. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow yet somehow stronger than I expected. Mom, please, don't make this a bigger deal than it is. It was just a birthday dinner. It wasn't just a dinner, it was a choice. You chose to celebrate with them and lie to me about it. You chose to call another woman Mom while I sat alone at home, waiting for a call that never came. That's not fair, she protested. You know how complicated things are between you and Dad. I'm caught in the middle. No, Eliza. You placed yourself in the middle. There's a difference. I could hear her frustration building, that familiar edge entering her voice, the tone she'd used as a teenager when she felt misunderstood. So what? I'm supposed to cut Dad out of my life forever because he fell in love with someone else? People get divorced, Mom. It happens. This isn't about your relationship with your father, I said, surprised by my own clarity. This is about honesty. This is about you looking me in the eye, or at least having the courage to tell me on the phone that you had other plans for my birthday. This is about respect. I respect you, she insisted, but the words rang hollow. No, you don't, I said, the truth of it settling over me like a heavy blanket. If you respected me, you wouldn't have lied. You would have said, "Mom, Dad scheduled Vanessa's birthday dinner on the same night as yours, and I've decided to go to hers instead." It would have hurt, but at least it would have been honest. And you would have been fine with that? Her tone was incredulous. "No," I admitted. "I would have been hurt, but I'm a grown woman, Eliza. I can handle disappointment. What I can't handle is being treated like I'm too fragile to deserve the truth." The conversation circled for another 20 minutes, Eliza alternating between defensive justifications and attempts to minimize what had happened. She never apologized. Not really. There were plenty of, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and "I'm sorry if you were hurt," but no acknowledgement of the deliberate deception, the casual cruelty of the choice she had made. When we finally hung up, I felt drained yet oddly liberated. For years, I had been bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes to accommodate my daughter's life, careful never to demand too much, never to impose. In doing so, I had enabled her to treat me as an afterthought, a relationship to be managed, rather than cherished. That evening, I didn't grade papers or prepare lesson plans as I normally would. Instead, I drove to the beach, 40 minutes from my home, and walked along the shore as the sun set. I had forgotten how much I loved this, the rhythm of the waves, the feel of sand beneath my feet, the vastness of the horizon. Before Richard, before Eliza, I had come here often, finding peace in the reminder of how small my troubles were against the immensity of the ocean. Standing there, watching darkness settle over the water, I made a decision. The relationship with my daughter needed to change, not just for my sake but for hers as well. By allowing her to treat me as less than I deserved, I was teaching her that it was acceptable to devalue the people who loved her most. For both our sakes, that pattern had to end. In the week following my discovery and confrontation with Eliza, I maintained a careful silence. She called 3 times, left voicemails that started with frustration. "Mom, you're being ridiculous about this," and gradually shifted to concern. "Mom, please call me back, I'm getting worried." I listened to each one but didn't return the calls. I needed space to process my feelings, to determine what I truly wanted from this relationship. Moving forward, I didn't share my pain with friends or colleagues. What would I say? My daughter lied to me so she could celebrate another woman's birthday. It sounded petty, the complaint of a possessive mother unable to let her adult daughter make her own choices. The deeper betrayal, the casual disregard, the easy lies, the mom that fell from her lips as she embraced Vanessa, was too complex, too painful to articulate. Instead, I channeled my energy into small, deliberate changes. I declined to chaperone the spring formal, an event I'd supervised for 15 years. I registered for a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd been meaning to do since Richard left. I called my sister Catherine in Arizona, with whom I'd lost touch over the years, and had a long conversation about possibly visiting during summer break. Each choice was minor in isolation, but together they represented a significant shift. For the first time in decades, I was prioritizing my own needs rather than arranging my life around others' expectations. It felt uncomfortable, almost selfish, but also necessary. On the 10th day of silence, a Friday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Eliza standing on my porch, a bakery box in her hands, her expression a careful blend of contrition and determination. "Peace offering," she said, holding up the box. "Your favorite lemon raspberry cake from Bellini's." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. We had to have this conversation eventually. It might as well be now. Eliza moved through my house with the familiarity of someone who had grown up within its walls, setting the cake on the kitchen counter, retrieving plates and forks from their usual drawers. I watched her, struck by how adult she appeared, confident in her expensive blazer and tailored pants, hair arranged in a sleek bob so different from the wild curls she'd had as a child. When had my little girl transformed so completely into this polished stranger? "You haven't been answering my calls," she said, slicing into the cake with precise movements. "I needed some time to think." "About what?" "Mom, I know you're upset, but this silent treatment is a bit extreme, don't you think?" It was one dinner. I accepted the plate she offered, but set it aside untouched. It wasn't just one dinner, Eliza. It was what that dinner represented. She sighed, leaning against the counter. "I knew you'd blow this out of proportion. Look, I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth. That was wrong. But juggling relationships with both you and Dad is complicated. Sometimes I make mistakes trying to keep the peace." Her apology felt rehearsed, focusing on the lie but not the deeper betrayal. I chose my next words carefully. "When was the first time you called Vanessa Mom?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked, fork suspended midway to her mouth. "I don't know. A couple of years ago, maybe? It wasn't a big deal. It just sort of happened." "And how did it just sort of happen?" She set her fork down, defensive now. "Dad and Vanessa had us over for Christmas. Vanessa had decorated the whole house, cooked this amazing dinner, put so much effort into making everything perfect. When she handed me my gift, she'd found this first edition Austen I'd been looking for. It just came out." "Thanks, Mom." She started crying. She was so happy. After that, it felt natural. I absorbed this, picturing the scene. Christmas at Richard and Vanessa's house. A thoughtful gift that demonstrated genuine care. My daughter, moved by the moment, expressing her affection spontaneously. It was also understandable, human, and yet it pierced me anew. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eliza's gaze dropped to her plate. "Because I knew it would hurt you, and because I was afraid you'd make me choose." "Have I ever asked you to choose between your father and me?" "Not directly," she admitted. "But Mom, you have to understand. Every time I mentioned Dad or Vanessa, I could see it in your face. That little flinch, that tightness around your mouth. You never said, 'Don't see them,' but you made it clear it caused you pain when I did." There was truth in her words, a mirror held up to reflect my own contribution to our strained relationship. Had my unspoken hurt created an environment where Eliza felt she had to compartmentalize her life, keeping her relationship with her father and his new wife separate from her relationship with me? Had my inability to fully process my divorce pushed my daughter into the role of emotional caretaker? "You're right," I said finally. "I did find it painful to hear about your father's new life. But Eliza, that was my burden to bear, not yours. You didn't need to protect me by lying. Didn't I?" Her voice rose slightly. "Mom, after Dad left, you were so fragile. You threw yourself into taking care of me, into teaching, but it was like you stopped being a whole person. You never dated, never developed new interests, never built a life that wasn't centered around me or your students. What was I supposed to do with that? How could I possibly tell you that I was developing a relationship with Vanessa when you had nothing else in your life but me?" Her words hit like a physical blow. Was that how she saw me? A fragile half-person, living vicariously through my daughter? The worst part was recognizing the kernel of truth in her assessment. I had narrowed my world after Richard left, focusing on what remained, my daughter, my career, rather than expanding to fill the emptiness with new experiences. "That doesn't justify lying to me about my birthday," I said quietly, "or treating me like I'm too delicate to handle the truth." Eliza ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that it created a fresh pang of loss. "I know, that was wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry. But Mom, you have to understand the position I'm in. Dad and Vanessa planned her birthday dinner weeks ago. Vanessa's parents were flying in from Chicago. Her sister came down from Portland with her kids. It was a whole family thing. And I'm not family? The question slipped out before I could stop it, vulnerable and raw. Of course you are, she said quickly. But it's different. You're separate. Separate. The word hung between us, accurate yet devastating in its implications. I had become separate, not just from Richard's life, which was inevitable, but from a significant portion of my daughter's life as well. While I'd been caring for Eliza's childhood home, maintaining holiday traditions, keeping her bedroom exactly as she'd left it for college, she'd been building connections with her father's new family, becoming integrated into their celebrations, their traditions. I need to show you something, I said, rising from the table. I went to my bedroom and returned with a small album I'd compiled over the years. Opening it on the kitchen table, I flipped through pages of photographs. Eliza's high school graduation, her college move-in day, impromptu dinners and holiday celebrations. In every image, it was just the two of us, occasionally joined by Marcus after they began dating. A visual record of our separate life. This is what I thought we had, I said, softly. A small family, perhaps, but a close one. Looking at these now, I realized something was missing. What? Eliza asked, her fingertips tracing the edge of a photo from her college graduation. Joy, I said simply. There's love here, certainly. Commitment, duty. But not the easy joy I see in those photos from Vanessa's birthday. Not the sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Mom, it's not your fault, I continued. It's mine. I've been so focused on not falling apart after your father left that I never rebuilt myself into someone new. I became a role, the devoted mother, the dedicated teacher, rather than a full person with her own desires and interests. And in doing so, I made our relationship heavy with unspoken expectations, with my unmet needs. No wonder you sought something lighter elsewhere. A tear slipped down Eliza's cheek. I never meant to hurt you. I know, and I did know, with sudden clarity. My daughter hadn't set out to betray me. She had simply been navigating a complicated family situation with the tools available to her, trying to find space for love in multiple places without causing pain. Her methods were flawed, her choices sometimes hurtful, but her intentions weren't malicious. I'm making changes, I said, closing the album. I've started painting again. I'm planning to visit Aunt Catherine this summer. I'm learning to build a life that isn't centered solely around being your mother. That's good, Eliza said, wiping her cheek. That's really good, Mom. I want us to have a relationship based on honesty, Eliza. That means you need to stop protecting me from truths you think will hurt me. And I need to become someone who can hear those truths without making you feel guilty for living your whole life, including the parts that involve your father and Vanessa. She nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I want that, too. But I also need you to understand something, I continued, meeting her gaze directly. What happened on my birthday, the lie, the celebration with Vanessa while I sat home alone, that cut deeply. Not because you spent time with them, but because you didn't value me enough to be honest. That kind of wound doesn't heal overnight. I understand, she said quietly. What can I do? How do we fix this? I considered her question, aware that we stood at a crossroads. The easiest path would be to accept her apology, to slide back into our familiar patterns, me accommodating her choices without complaint, her managing my feelings through careful omissions. But that path led nowhere new. We start by acknowledging the reality of our situation, I said finally. You have 2 maternal figures in your life now. I won't pretend that doesn't hurt sometimes, but I won't make you feel guilty about it either. In return, I ask that you treat me with the respect of honesty. No more lies, no more managing my feelings. Just straightforward truth, even when it's difficult. Eliza nodded, her expression serious. I can do that. And I think... I paused. The next word's difficult to form. I think I need some space to continue the changes I've begun. To figure out who Margaret Langley is beyond being Eliza's mother or Richard's ex-wife. What does that mean, exactly? Her voice held a note of anxiety. It means I might not be as available as I've always been. It means I'll have my own plans sometimes, my own priorities. It means our relationship needs to become more balanced, mutual support rather than me orbiting around your life. The cake sat between us, untouched and forgotten. Eliza studied my face, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years, not as the mother who had always been her safe harbor, but as a woman still in the process of becoming. Okay, she said finally. I respect that. And Mom? I really am sorry. About the birthday, about Vanessa, about all of it. This time, her apology felt genuine, rooted in understanding rather than placation. I nodded, accepting it for what it was, not a solution, but a beginning. As Eliza left that evening, promising to call the following week, I stood in the doorway watching her drive away. The conversation had been painful but necessary, the first step toward a more honest relationship. But as I closed the door and turned back to my empty house, I knew the harder work still lay ahead. Redefining myself at 60 wasn't just about taking art classes or visiting my sister. It was about excavating desires and dreams I'd buried so deeply I could barely remember them. It was about learning to place myself at the center of my own life after decades of living for others. I didn't know if I could do it. But for the first time in years, I was determined to try. Spring yielded to summer, bringing with it a heat that shimmered above the pavement and turned my classroom into a sauna despite the ancient air conditioning unit rattling in the window. Finals week approached, students grew restless, and I found myself counting down the days until summer break, with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years. 2 months had passed since my conversation with Eliza in my kitchen. True to her word, she had made efforts to be more honest, more present in our relationship. Our Sunday dinners resumed, though less frequently, every other week instead of weekly. And our phone conversations, while sometimes awkward, carried a new authenticity that felt like progress. What hadn't changed was the underlying tension whenever Richard or Vanessa entered the conversation. Eliza would mention them, a deliberate attempt at transparency, but her voice would tighten, her eyes darting to gauge my reaction. I would nod and ask appropriate follow-up questions, determined to show I could handle hearing about her relationship with them. But we both knew we were performing, neither of us fully comfortable with this new honesty. The real test came in late May when Eliza called to discuss Memorial Day weekend. Marcus and I were thinking of having a barbecue, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Nothing fancy, just a few people in the backyard. Would you like to come? That sounds lovely, I replied, sorting through final exams at my kitchen table. What time should I arrive? There was a pause, the slight intake of breath that had become familiar, the sound of Eliza preparing to say something she thought might hurt me. Dad and Vanessa will be there too, she said. And her parents, since they're visiting for the weekend. I wanted you to know up front. I set down my red pen, giving the conversation my full attention. This was new territory, a direct invitation to occupy the same space as Richard and Vanessa, to cross the boundary between my separate life and theirs. I appreciate your honesty, I said slowly. But I don't think that would be comfortable for anyone involved. Why don't we plan something just the three of us another day? Mom? Eliza sighed, frustration edging into her voice. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You say you want me to be honest, that you can handle my relationship with Dad and Vanessa, but then you refuse to be in the same room with them. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to keep juggling separate events for everyone? I understand it's complicated. No, you don't, she interrupted. You and Dad have been divorced for 12 years. 12 years, Mom. At some point, you have to move on. Be in the same room. Act like adults. If not for your own sake, then for mine. Her words stung, partly because of their harshness, but mostly because they contained a kernel of truth. I had avoided any situation where I might encounter Richard and Vanessa together, using the excuse that it would be uncomfortable for everyone, when really it was my own discomfort I was protecting. You're right, I conceded. I have been avoiding them. But Eliza, surely you can understand why sharing space with the man who left me for another woman, and that woman herself, might be difficult. Of course I understand that, she said, her tone softening slightly. But Mom, life is messy. Families are complicated. Look at Marcus's parents. They've been divorced longer than you and Dad. They both remarried, and they still managed to show up to the same events without drama. Because they love Marcus, and they put his needs first. The comparison hit hard. Was I being selfish? Putting my own emotional comfort above my daughter's need for an integrated family life? Or was she being unreasonable, expecting me to smile and make small talk with the two people who had shattered my life? I'll think about it, I promised. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll consider coming. That's all I'm asking, Eliza said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you, Mom. After we hung up, I sat surrounded by half-graded exams, my mind far from comma splices and thesis statements. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to be in the same space as Richard and Vanessa, to see them, interact, to witness their life together up close rather than through the filtered lens of stories or social media photos. The thought made my stomach clench. 12 years had passed since our divorce, but the humiliation still felt fresh. The pitying glances from colleagues, the sudden social reshuffling as mutual friends quietly chose sides, the knowledge that everyone was discussing my failed marriage behind my back. Could I really walk into Eliza's backyard and face all that again? I spent the next week oscillating between determination and dread. One moment I would resolve to attend the barbecue, to prove to Eliza, and to myself, that I had moved beyond the past. The next, I would imagine Vanessa's polished smile, Richard's awkward attempts at normalcy, and the courage would evaporate. 2 days before Memorial Day, I made my decision. I called Eliza and told her I would come, but only for dessert. A brief appearance, a symbolic crossing of the divide, but not a full afternoon of sustained interaction. That's great, Mom, she said, genuine warmth in her voice. I'm really proud of you. Her praise felt both comforting and slightly condescending, as if I were a child being congratulated for sharing toys. But I pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about my pride. It was about taking a step toward the integrated family life Eliza clearly craved. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, sunshine, blue skies, a light breeze that carried the scent of blooming jasmine through my open windows. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading roses and pulling weeds, finding calm in the repetitive tasks. In the afternoon, I baked a blueberry cobbler, Richard's favorite dessert in the years we were married. A peace offering of sorts, though. I wasn't sure if he would recognize the significance. At 5:30, I changed into a simple sundress, pale blue linen, modest yet flattering, and drove the 15 minutes to Eliza and Marcus's home. As I pulled up to the curb, I could hear laughter and music drifting from the backyard. I sat in my car for a moment, cobbler balanced on my lap, gathering courage. You can do this, I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. It's just a couple of hours. For Eliza. The front door was unlocked, a handwritten sign directing guests to the backyard. I followed the stone path around the side of the house, my heartbeat accelerating with each step. When I rounded the corner, the scene spread before me like something from a magazine. Twinkling string lights crisscrossed the patio, colorful paper lanterns swayed in the breeze, and a long table decorated with wildflower centerpieces stood at the center of it all. But it wasn't the decor that stopped me in my tracks. It was the people. A dozen or so guests mingled around the yard, drinks in hand, conversations flowing. But my eyes were drawn immediately to the patio, where Richard stood at the grill, spatula in hand, Vanessa beside him, their bodies angled toward each other in the familiar posture of longtime couples. They were laughing at something, their faces alight with shared amusement. Across the yard, Eliza moved among her guests, refilling drinks, the perfect hostess. She hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment I considered retreat, leaving the cobbler on the steps and driving away before anyone noticed my arrival. But then, Marcus emerged from the house carrying a tray of glasses, spotted me, and waved. "Margaret! You made it!" His exclamation drew attention. Eliza turned, her face breaking into a genuine smile as she hurried toward me. Richard glanced up from the grill, his expression flickering from surprise to something unreadable. And Vanessa. Vanessa straightened, her hand automatically moving to smooth her hair, her smile fixed in place. "Mom." Eliza reached me, enfolding me in a quick hug. "I'm so glad you came. Is that blueberry cobbler? It smells amazing," I nodded, transferring the still warm dish to her hands. "An old family recipe. Dad's favorite," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I remember you used to make it for his birthday every year." So she did remember. The knowledge warmed me unexpectedly. "Come on," she continued, looping her arm through mine. "Let me introduce you to everyone." What followed was a blur of names and faces. Marcus's colleagues, neighbors, friends from their kickball league. I shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, clutched the glass of white wine Eliza pressed into my hand. All the while, I was acutely aware of Richard and Vanessa on the periphery of my vision, still at the grill, still very deliberately not approaching me. It was Eliza who finally orchestrated the inevitable meeting. After I'd greeted most of the other guests, she guided me toward the patio, her grip on my arm tightening slightly as we approached. "Dad," she called, a brightness in her voice that sounded forced even to my ears. "Look who made it." And she brought, "Your favorite cobbler." Richard turned, wiping his hands on the Kiss the Cook apron he wore, the same apron I had given him our first Christmas together, I realized with a jolt. Had he kept it all these years, or had Eliza given him a similar one? The question flickered through my mind, inane and yet somehow important. "Margaret," he nodded, his expression careful. "It's good to see you. Thanks for coming." "Richard," I managed, my voice steadier than I expected. "The food smells wonderful." An awkward silence descended, broken only when Vanessa stepped forward, extending her hand as if we were meeting at a business function rather than in the aftermath of a marriage she had helped destroy. "Margaret," she said, her voice pitched low and warm. "Thank you for coming. I know this can't be easy, but it means so much to Eliza." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. She was still beautiful, silver now threaded, through her copper hair, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the only concession to the passage of time. In her sundress and cardigan, a delicate gold necklace at her throat, she exuded an effortless elegance I had never mastered. "Vanessa," I replied, accepting her handshake briefly. "Thank you for having me." More platitudes followed, comments about the weather, compliments on the garden, safe topics that skimmed the surface of our shared history without acknowledging its depths. Richard flipped burgers with excessive concentration. Vanessa fidgeted with her necklace. Eliza hovered anxiously nearby, refilling drinks that weren't empty, her smile growing more strained by the minute. Finally, unable to maintain the pretense any longer, I excused myself to use the restroom. Inside the house, I leaned against the bathroom sink, breathing deeply, trying to quell the nausea rising in my throat. I had done it. Crossed the threshold, exchanged pleasantries, maintained my dignity. Surely I could last another hour or so. When I emerged, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Eliza and Vanessa, their tones hushed but intense. I hesitated in the hallway, knowing I should announce my presence, but frozen by the sound of my own name. Didn't expect Margaret to actually come. Vanessa was saying, "You should have warned us, Eliza." "I told you she might," Eliza replied, defensive. "And anyway, why does it matter? It's been 12 years. Everyone's moved on." "Has she?" Because from where I'm standing, she seems to be stuck exactly where she was a decade ago. The same haircut, the same clothes, the same sad, martyred expression. My breath caught. The casual cruelty of Vanessa's assessment felt like a slap. "That's not fair," Eliza protested, but weakly, without conviction. "Isn't it? Look, I understand. It was hard for her when Richard left. But at some point, a person has to rebuild their life, make new connections, move forward. The way she clings to you, to this idea of being the perfect, long-suffering mother, it's not healthy, Eliza. For her or for you." "She's trying," Eliza said, her voice small. "She's taking classes, reconnecting with her sister. She's making progress." Vanessa's laugh was soft, dismissive. "Baby steps. Meanwhile, she's still using you as an emotional crutch, still making you feel guilty for having a relationship with your father, with me." "She doesn't do that anymore," Eliza insisted. But again, there was that hesitation, that lack of conviction. "Doesn't she? Then why did you spend the entire week stressing about this barbecue? Why are you hovering around her like she might shatter at any moment? She's trained you to manage her feelings, Eliza. It's what she's been doing since the divorce." Each word pierced me deeper than the last. Was that how they saw me? A manipulative, emotionally stunted woman using her daughter as a substitute for a real life? The unfairness of it burned, hot and sharp behind my eyes. And yet, hadn't I just been thinking the same thing about myself? Hadn't I recognized that I had narrowed my life too much, relied on Eliza for too much of my emotional fulfillment? I was still processing this uncomfortable parallel when I heard Eliza's next words, quiet but clear in the silent house. "Sometimes I wish Mom would just find someone new, move away, start fresh somewhere else. Then maybe we could all just move on." Some moments in life arrive with such clarity that they divide everything into before and after. Standing in Eliza's hallway, hearing my daughter wish I would simply disappear from her life, was one such moment. The pain was immediate, searing, but accompanied by a strange sense of liberation. The illusion I had been clinging to, that I remained central to my daughter's life, that our bond would always supersede all others, shattered completely. I didn't confront Eliza. I didn't storm into the kitchen and demand explanations. Instead, I quietly retraced my steps through the house and slipped out the front door, leaving my half-finished wine on a side table, my car keys clutched so tightly in my palm that they left imprints on my skin. Driving home, I felt oddly calm. The crushing weight I had carried for years, the burden of being the good mother, the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed, seemed to lift from my shoulders. If Eliza wanted me to move on, to move away, perhaps that was exactly what I should do. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. My department chair expressed concern. "Are you sure you're all right, Margaret? This isn't like you." But I assured him I'd be back the following day. Then I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of tea and a legal pad and began to write. First, I made a list of things I had once loved but had gradually abandoned. Painting, watercolors, hiking in the mountains, reading poetry, attending symphony performances, traveling to new cities, small pleasures and grand adventures alike, all sacrificed on the altar of practicality and obligation. Next, I listed places I had always wanted to visit: the coast of Maine, with its rugged lighthouses, Santa Fe, with its vibrant art scene, the rolling hills of Tuscany, the lavender fields of Provence, dreams deferred for so long they had almost been forgotten. Finally, I wrote down assets and liabilities, my teacher's pension, modest savings, the equity in my small house, outstanding. Debts, minimal, thankfully. Years of frugal living meant I had a financial cushion. Not enough for luxury, but sufficient for a simpler life, perhaps in a place with a lower cost of living. By mid-afternoon, a plan had begun to crystallize. Not a reaction to hurt feelings, not an impulsive flight, but a deliberate reclaiming of my life. I would finish the school year, which had only 3 weeks remaining. I would put my house on the market, and I would move, not to spite Eliza or to punish her, but because she was right. I needed to start fresh somewhere else, to build a life that wasn't defined by old wounds and lingering attachments. The decision, once made, brought with it a certainty I hadn't felt in years. This was right. This was necessary. This was, perhaps, long overdue. Over the next several days, Eliza called repeatedly. Her voicemails progressed from confused, "Mom, where did you go? You just disappeared from the barbecue," to concerned, "Are you okay? Please call me back," to irritated, "Seriously, Mom, this silent treatment is getting old." I listened to each one but didn't call back. I needed space to solidify my resolve before facing her again. On the Friday after Memorial Day, I left work early and drove to a real estate office in town. Grace Williams, an agent recommended by a colleague, greeted me warmly. "So, Margaret, are you looking to downsize? Find something with fewer stairs, perhaps?" Her assumption was understandable. Most women my age who came to her were looking for retirement-friendly options in the same community. "Actually, I'm leaving town entirely," I replied, surprised by how confident the words sounded. "I'd like to put my house on the market as soon as possible." Grace's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I see. And where are you relocating to?" "I'm not entirely sure yet. Somewhere on the coast, perhaps. I've always loved the ocean." She nodded, professional mask sliding back into place. "Well, let's talk about your timeline and what you're hoping to get for your property." An hour later, I left with a folder of documents to review and an appointment for Grace to assess my home the following week. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and took a deep breath. The first concrete step had been taken. There was no turning back now. That evening, as I was sorting through old photos, deciding what to keep and what to discard, my doorbell rang. Eliza stood on the porch, arms crossed, expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "You're avoiding me," she said without preamble when I opened the door. "Yes," I admitted, stepping aside to let her in. I needed some time to think. She entered, her gaze sweeping over the piles of photographs and albums spread across my living room floor. "What's all this? Are you organizing old photos?" "Something like that." I closed the door and returned to my spot on the floor. "How did... You know I left the barbecue? Marcus saw you drive away. He thought you were just going to get something from your car." She perched on the edge of the sofa, watching me sort pictures into boxes. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" There was no gentle way to say it. "I overheard your conversation with Vanessa in the kitchen." Eliza went very still. "Which part?" "Enough," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "I heard how you both see me, stuck in the past, using you as an emotional crutch. And I heard that you wish I would move away so everyone could move on." Color flooded her cheeks, but to her credit, she didn't deny it. "That wasn't... I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "I think you did," I replied, surprised by my own calm. "And the thing is, Eliza, you're not entirely wrong." Her expression shifted from embarrassment to confusion. "What do you mean?" "I have been stuck in a holding pattern since your father left. I've defined myself primarily as your mother, prioritizing that role above everything else. And in doing so, I've placed an unfair burden on you, expecting you to be my primary source of emotional fulfillment, making you responsible for managing my feelings about your father and Vanessa." Mom, I held up a hand, needing to finish. It wasn't intentional, and it wasn't your responsibility to fix it. But I recognize it now, and I'm making changes. What kind of changes? Her voice was cautious. I gestured to the photo albums. I'm downsizing, deciding what's important enough to keep, what I can let go of. You're moving? The wariness in her tone suggested she hadn't actually expected her wish to come true. Yes, I'm putting the house on the market. Once the school year ends, I'm going to take some time to travel, then find a place near the coast to settle down. Eliza stared at me, speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Because of what I said? What you overheard? Partly, I acknowledged. Hearing those words hurt, but they also confirmed something I've been feeling for a while now. This town, this house, they're filled with memories of my life with your father, with you. Some of those memories are beautiful, others painful. But they're all in the past. I need to create a future for myself, not just live in the shadow of what used to be. But what about us? The uncertainty in her voice tugged at my heart. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, still the little girl who had once needed me so desperately. Our relationship will continue, Eliza. It will just take a different form. One that hopefully will be healthier for both of us. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on a photo I had just placed in a box. A picture of her at 5 years old, pigtails and missing front teeth, beaming. On her first day of kindergarten. Is this my fault? She asked finally. Because I lied about your birthday? Because I've been seeing Dad and Vanessa? No, I said firmly. This isn't about blame. It's about recognizing that we've been caught in an unhealthy pattern, both of us? You feeling obligated to manage my feelings? Me expecting you to fill gaps in my life that I should be filling myself. We both deserve better. But we've been working on that, she protested. Things have been better between us lately, more honest. Can't we just continue that progress? You don't have to move away. I considered her words, trying to separate my own emotional needs from hers. Was this another instance of me sacrificing my well-being for her comfort, or was her concern legitimate? I think, I said slowly, that physical distance might actually help us in this case. When I'm living in the same town, it's too easy to fall back into old patterns, me expecting constant access to your life, you feeling guilty when you prioritize other relationships. A little separation could give us both room to establish healthier boundaries. Where will you go? Her question was practical now, a sign she was beginning to process the reality of my decision. I'm not entirely sure yet. I'd like to visit some places first, see where I feel drawn to settle. I've always loved New England, Maine perhaps, or coastal Massachusetts. That's so far away, she said, her voice catching. We'd only see each other a few times a year. There are phones, video calls, and visits work both ways. I'd come here sometimes. You could come to me others. It's not as if we're losing each other, Eliza. We're just changing how we connect. Thoms wiped a tear from her cheek, looking around the living room as if seeing it, and me, with new eyes. You're really serious about this? I am. And there's nothing I can say to change your mind? I reached across the space between us to take her hand. This isn't about you changing your behavior or saying the right things. It's about me needing to discover who I am outside of being your mother, Richard's ex-wife, a teacher at Westlake High. Those roles have defined me for so long that I've lost touch with the woman beneath them. Something in my words seemed to resonate with her. She squeezed my hand, a sad smile touching her lips. I've never thought about it that way. I've always just seen you as Mom, not as someone with her own dreams and needs separate from that role. That's natural, I assured her. Children aren't supposed to consider their parents as complete human beings with complex inner lives. But I'm 60 years old, Eliza. If I don't make changes now, I'll wake up one day 80 and full of regrets for the life I never allowed myself to live. We talked for hours that evening, more honestly than we had in years. Eliza shared her guilt over maintaining relationships with Richard and Vanessa, her frustration at feeling caught between separate family units, her fear that my moving away represented some kind of abandonment. I spoke of my loneliness after Richard left, how I had channeled all my emotional energy into motherhood, how I had let other aspects of my identity wither away. There were tears on both sides, moments of tension, flashes of the old patterns attempting to reassert themselves. But there was also laughter, reminiscing over happier times, and glimpses of a new kind of relationship forming between us, adult to adult, each respecting the other's full humanity. As Eliza prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "I'm sorry about what I said at the barbecue. I don't really want you to disappear from my life." "I know," I assured her. "And I'm not disappearing. I'm just expanding, creating space for myself to grow in new directions." She nodded, understanding, dawning in her eyes. "I think that's brave, Mom. Scary, but brave." After she left, I returned to my sorting, handling each photograph with new awareness. These weren't just memories to be preserved or discarded. They were chapters in a story still being written. The past would always be part of me, but it no longer needed to define my future. The next morning, I woke early and made a call I had been contemplating for weeks. Catherine, my sister in Arizona, answered on the third ring. "Maggie? Is everything okay?" "It's not even 7 here." "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I've made a decision, and I wanted you to be the first to know." "What kind of decision?" Caution colored her voice. In our family, unexpected news was rarely good news. "I'm selling my house and leaving town. I thought I might come visit you for a while if that offer's still open. See the desert, clear my head, figure out where I want to go next." There was a moment of silence, then a warm chuckle. "Well, it's about damn time. I've been telling you to get out of that town for years. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it." As I hung up, sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in years, I felt something that had been missing for far too long. Anticipation. Not just for a visit with my sister, but for all the possibilities that lay ahead. All the versions of Margaret Langley I had yet to discover. The path forward wasn't entirely clear. There would be practical challenges, emotional adjustments, moments of doubt. But one thing was certain. I was no longer waiting for life to happen to me. I was choosing it, embracing it, stepping toward it with eyes wide open, and in that choice lay a freedom I had almost forgotten existed. The morning of my 65th birthday dawns clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of my coastal cottage. 5 years have passed since that painful 60th birthday that changed everything. 5 years of growth, discovery, and gradual healing. I rise early, as has become my habit since moving to Maine. There's something about the quality of morning light here, the way it turns the Atlantic to molten silver, that draws me from sleep. My small bedroom faces east, positioned deliberately so the sun wakes me naturally, a daily reminder that each day offers new beginnings. After pulling on a thick sweater against the October chill, I make tea in the handcrafted mug I bought from a local potter, one of the first purchases I made when I settled here. My cottage is modest by most standards: 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen and living area, a screened porch that becomes my second home during summer months. But its simplicity suits me, as does its location on a small bluff overlooking the harbor of Seabrook, a fishing village far enough from tourist routes to maintain its authenticity. I carry my tea to the porch, settling into the Adirondack chair where I've spent countless hours reading, painting, or simply watching the ever-changing Moods of the ocean. Today, the water lies calm beneath a sky brushed with wisps of pink clouds. Fishing boats are already moving out toward deeper waters, their running lights still visible in the half-light of dawn. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime since I left my old home. Other times, the memories feel so fresh I could be standing in my former kitchen, discovering those photos of Eliza celebrating with Richard and Vanessa. That moment, the shattering glass, the wine staining my rug, the sudden clarity that came with complete betrayal, marked the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. The path between then and now wasn't straight or simple. After the house sold, more quickly than I'd expected, to a young family with 2 small children who loved the established garden I'd tended for years, I spent 6 months with my sister Catherine in Arizona. Her sprawling ranch-style home outside Sedona offered space to breathe, to process, to plan without pressure. Catherine, 10 years my senior and widowed for nearly as long, had built a rich life filled with friends, volunteer work, and travel. Watching her navigate her 70s with energy and purpose offered a model I hadn't considered. A vision of aging that wasn't defined by loss or limitation, but by continued growth and exploration. "You know," she said one evening as we shared wine on her patio, the red rocks glowing in the sunset, "I worried about you for years after Richard left. Not just because of the divorce, but because you seemed to shrink afterward. Like you were taking up less space in the world." Her observation stung with its accuracy. I had contracted my life, focusing it narrowly on teaching and motherhood, allowing other dimensions of myself to atrophy from disuse. "I think I was afraid," I admitted, "of making mistakes, of being judged, of discovering that without Richard, without the role of wife, I might not know who I was anymore." Catherine had nodded, her weathered face softened by understanding. "And now? Now I'm terrified," I'd laughed. "But it's a different kind of fear, not the kind that keeps you small. The kind that comes with growth." Those months in the desert taught me patience. The stark landscape, so different from the lush greenery I'd known all my life, revealed its beauty slowly. I learned to see the subtle variations in rock formations, the unexpected blooms that appeared after rare rains, the resilience of life in seemingly inhospitable conditions. The desert became a metaphor for this new phase of my life. Austerity yielding unexpected abundance, emptiness creating space for discovery. From Arizona, I embarked on what Catherine jokingly called my Finding Margaret tour. Not an aimless wandering, but a deliberate exploration of places and possibilities. I spent 2 weeks in Santa Fe, immersing myself in its vibrant art scene, taking a workshop in landscape painting that awakened an interest dormant since college. A month in a rented cottage on the Oregon coast gave me time to hike coastal trails and volunteer at a marine wildlife center, learning about tide pool ecosystems and conservation efforts. Vermont in autumn offered a riot of color and a different kind of beauty, the mountains ablaze with foliage, small towns nestled in valleys between rolling hills. I stayed in a converted barn owned by a retired professor who'd started a small press publishing poetry by local writers. Our conversations over morning coffee rekindled my love of literature beyond the classroom texts I'd taught for decades. Throughout these travels, I maintained contact with Eliza. Our conversations, initially strained and careful, gradually found a new rhythm. Without the weight of daily proximity and expectation, we began to see each other more clearly. I shared stories of my experiences. She kept me updated on her work, her marriage, her growing friendship with a colleague who shared her interest in rock climbing. Details of her life she might never have mentioned during our previous Sunday dinners, focused as they were on maintaining comfortable routines rather than genuine connection. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said during one of our video calls, her face serious on my laptop screen. "What you're doing takes real courage." "It doesn't feel like courage," I replied. "It feels like necessity. That's what makes it brave." She insisted. You're not doing this on a whim or for attention. You're doing it because you recognize it's what you need, even though it's difficult. Her words stayed with me, a warm current beneath the occasional doubts and uncertainties that surfaced during my journey. Was I being selfish? Impractical? Would I regret leaving the security of my teaching position, my established community, my proximity to my daughter? But each new experience, each moment of joy or discovery, confirmed that while the path might be uncertain, the direction was right. By the following spring, I found myself drawn to the coast of Maine. I'd visited briefly during my travels and felt an immediate connection to its rugged beauty, its resilient communities, its blend of artistic enclaves and working harbors. On a return trip, I discovered Seabrook, not a tourist destination, but a working village with generations of families connected to the sea. The cottage came into my life through a series of coincidences that felt, in retrospect, like fate. A conversation with the owner of a small gallery where I'd purchased a watercolor of the harbor led to coffee with her friend Harriet, a retired nurse whose sister was moving to assisted living and needed to sell her coastal property. The cottage needed work. The roof leaked in one corner. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The garden had grown wild with neglect. But when I stood on its small porch and looked out at the harbor, something shifted into place inside me. This was where I could begin again. The price, while still substantial, was within reach thanks to the sale of my previous home and years of careful saving. With help from a local contractor recommended by Harriet, I updated the essential systems, but kept the cottage's character intact. The wide plank pine floors, the riverstone fireplace, the built-in bookshelves lining the living room walls. By midsummer, I had officially relocated, my belongings pared down to what mattered most: books, my mother's china, photographs curated to represent genuine moments of joy rather than obligatory documentation of milestones. Building a life in Seabrook happened organically. I introduced myself at the small library that served the community, offering to help with their summer reading program for local children. Through that volunteer work, I met Eleanor, the librarian who had retired from teaching high school English in Portland before returning to her hometown. She invited me to join her book club, 6 women who gathered monthly in each other's homes, discussions ranging far beyond the selected reading to encompass politics, philosophy, personal histories. When the community college in the next town over-advertised for a part-time literature instructor, Eleanor encouraged me to apply. They need someone who can make the classics relevant to adults returning to education, she insisted. Someone who understands that these students have lived lives, have experiences to connect with the texts. I got the position, teaching 2 evening classes per semester, enough to provide structure and intellectual engagement without consuming my life as full-time teaching had before. My students ranged from 20-somethings seeking to complete degrees to retirees pursuing lifelong learning. Their diverse perspectives enriched our discussions of Austen, Ellison, Morrison, Shakespeare, reminding me why I had loved teaching before it became more obligation than joy. Through another book club member, I discovered the Coastal Arts Collective, a group of amateur and professional artists who met weekly to paint, critique each other's work, and occasionally exhibit in local galleries. My watercolors of tide pools and harbor scenes will never hang in museums, but they've improved from embarrassing to pleasantly mediocre, and more importantly, the process of creating them brings me genuine satisfaction. Eliza visited for the first time that fall, flying into Portland where I met her at the small airport. The weekend unfolded with an ease I hadn't anticipated, both of us relaxing into new versions of ourselves. She admired the cottage, explored the village, joined me for my regular Saturday morning walk along the harbor with Eleanor and 2 other friends. Over dinner at the local seafood restaurant, where the owner greeted me by name and asked about my latest painting, Eliza studied me with new eyes. "You seem different here," she observed. "More present." "I feel more present," I agreed. "Less defined by the past, by old roles and wounds. On her last morning, as we drank coffee on the porch, she broached the subject we'd both been avoiding. "Dad asks about you sometimes. He saw pictures of your new place on my Instagram." I felt the familiar twinge, but it was duller now, more distant. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you seem happy, that you're building something good here." She hesitated, then added, "Vanessa saw the pictures too. She said your cottage looked very charming." The comment could have been condescending, but I chose to take it at face value. "It is charming, in its way. Not grand or impressive, but it suits me." Eliza nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I used to think you and Vanessa were complete opposites. She was everything you weren't, stylish, artistic, confident in social situations. But now I see you both differently. You're both strong women who know what you want, who don't compromise your values. You just express it differently." The comparison surprised me, but I found I didn't mind it. Vanessa and I would never be friends. Too much history, too much pain lay between us. But perhaps we could be acknowledged as complex individuals rather than competing archetypes in Eliza's life. That first visit established a new pattern. Eliza came to Maine every few months, sometimes with Marcus, sometimes alone. I returned to my former hometown occasionally, staying in a hotel rather than imposing on them, meeting for meals or events, but maintaining my independence. When Eliza announced her pregnancy the following spring, our relationship evolved again, me offering support without overstepping, her including me in her journey without making me responsible for her emotional well-being. My granddaughter Sophia was born on a snowy February morning. I flew down immediately, staying for 2 weeks to help with meals, laundry, midnight feedings. Holding that tiny bundle, I felt a love both familiar and new, the fierce protectiveness I remembered from Eliza's infancy, but tempered now with perspective, with an understanding that this child would follow her own path, separate from my expectations or needs. During that visit, I saw Richard and Vanessa at Eliza's home, an encounter that proved less difficult than I had feared. Time and distance had dulled the sharp edges of our shared history. We exchanged pleasantries, admired the baby, maintained the cordial distance of people connected by circumstance rather than choice. I noticed the silver threading Richard's dark hair, the slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Vanessa was still elegant, still beautiful, but softer somehow, her famous copper hair now highlighted with strands of white. As I watched them coo over Sophia, I realized something surprising. I no longer envied them, no longer felt diminished by their happiness. Their life was theirs, as mine was mine, neither inherently better or worse, just different paths forward from a shared past. Now, on the morning of my 65th birthday, I reflect on these past 5 years as I watch the sun climb, higher over the Atlantic. My quiet celebration will begin with a walk along the harbor with Eleanor and our friends, followed by lunch at the small cafe that makes the bouillabaisse I love. In the afternoon, I'll teach my literature class, where we're discussing The Lighthouse, Woolf's meditation on time, loss, and the fleeting nature of human connection. This evening, a small gathering at Eleanor's home. Wine, good food, friends who know me now rather than who I was before. Eliza called last night, Sophia babbling in the background. "Happy birthday Eve, Mom," she said, her voice warm across the miles. "Your gift should arrive today. Let me know if it doesn't." "You didn't need to send anything," I protested. "Of course I did. 65 is a milestone." She paused, then added, "I've been thinking about your 60th, about how different things were then, how much we've both changed. For the better? I think," I said. "Definitely for the better." Her voice softened. "I wish I could be there tomorrow." "You'll be here next month," I reminded her. "We'll celebrate then too." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my porch, listening to the rhythm of waves against the shore, and thought about milestones, about endings and beginnings, about how sometimes we need to lose what we thought we wanted in order to discover what we truly need. The package from Eliza arrives as I'm finishing my tea, delivered by Ron, our local postman who doubles as the town's unofficial news network. "Special delivery for the birthday girl," he calls up to the porch. "Want me to bring it up, or are you coming down?" I meet him halfway down the path, accepting the flat rectangular package with thanks. Back on the porch, I unwrap it carefully, to find a framed watercolor of my cottage, painted from the harbor view so the morning sun illuminates its weathered shingles and blue trim. The artist has captured details I love: the drift of smoke from the chimney, the riotous blue hydrangeas. Along the front path, the Adirondack chairs on the porch. In the corner, a small signature: E. Langley. "Oh," I breathe, tracing the brushstrokes with my fingertip. I didn't know Eliza had been painting, hadn't realized she possessed this talent. Had she always had this ability, this eye for beauty and detail? Or was this something new she had discovered about herself, just as I had discovered unexpected aspects of my own character these past 5 years? Beneath the painting, a card in Eliza's familiar handwriting: "To new beginnings, continued. Growth and the courage to change. I'm proud to be your daughter. Happy 65th, Mom. With all my love, Eliza." Tears blur my vision as I prop the painting against the porch railing. The gift isn't just the artwork itself, beautiful as it is, but the recognition behind it. Eliza seeing me, truly seeing me in this new life I've created. Understanding that the cottage isn't just a place I live, but a symbol of my transformation, my independence, my late blooming joy. 5 years ago, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at photos of my daughter celebrating another woman's birthday, feeling discarded and forgotten. The pain of that moment was real, the betrayal a turning point in my life. But sitting here now, holding tangible evidence of my daughter's love and understanding, I feel no bitterness, only gratitude for the journey that moment initiated. The path from there to here wasn't easy. It required confronting painful truths, about myself as well as others. It meant acknowledging how I had contributed to unhealthy patterns in my relationships. It demanded courage to step into uncertainty, to rebuild my identity beyond the roles that had defined me for decades. But the reward has been beyond anything I could have imagined. Not just a healed relationship with my daughter, but a discovered relationship with myself. The woman who wakes each morning in this cottage by the sea, who paints mediocre watercolors, teaches literature to adult learners, hikes coastal trails in all weather, hosts dinner parties for new friends, reads poetry by candlelight. This woman is both familiar and new, a continuing revelation. As I prepare to begin my day, my 65th year, I raise my teacup in a silent toast. Not to what I lost, but to what I found when I finally had the courage to begin again. To the painful birthday that became a doorway rather than an ending. To the daughter who is finding her own path while respecting mine. To the understanding that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers, if only we're brave enough to learn their lessons. The sun clears the horizon completely now, turning the water to diamonds. A new day, a new year, a new chapter, in a story still being written, one conscious choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.